when a small idea dismantled an industry giant. It started as a whisper in a corner of the market no one cared to examine. A simple concept, dismissed as too small to matter, quietly gathered momentum while the incumbents slept. And before anyone realized what was happening, that small idea had begun pulling threads from the very fabric of a giant's empire. To understand why this moment still echoes today, we need to return to a time when the industry giant seemed untouchable. Its dominance felt permanent, woven into the daily lives of millions. Competitors barely challenged it. Analysts praised its scale as if scale alone were a shield against change. Yet beneath the polished exterior, cracks were forming. The company had grown so large that it no longer heard the world shifting around it. Its systems were slow, its decisions predictable, and its confidence unshakable, until the unexpected arrived. Our story begins with an outsider, a founder working from a cramped workspace with more determination than resources. They weren't trying to destroy a giant. They were simply trying to solve a problem others had learned to tolerate. The solution they built was small, imperfect, and unremarkable at first glance. No glossy marketing, no industry recognition, just a humble tool shaped by genuine frustration. But within that tool was a spark. It solved a need the giant had ignored for years, a need that seemed insignificant only because no one had bothered to measure its importance. Users discovered it by accident, a handful at first, then dozens, then hundreds. Word spread through quiet conversations rather than expensive campaigns. The small idea grew not through force, but through undeniable usefulness. As adoption increased, something remarkable happened. Patterns began to shift. Behaviors changed. People stopped relying on the giant's products for tasks the small idea handled effortlessly. It wasn't a dramatic overthrow. It was a steady migration, invisible at first, then impossible to deny. And while the giant continued broadcasting its dominance, a silent tide was forming beneath its feet. That tide would soon become the first signal of a transformation the industry never saw coming. Growth came quietly, almost politely. The small idea slipped into workflows, routines, and habits without asking for permission. It didn't try to compete head-on with the giant. It simply offered an alternative where one had never existed. Every new user became a messenger, each recommendation a quiet rebellion against the old way of doing things. And for a while, the giant didn't notice a thing. Inside the giant's headquarters, confidence disguised itself as certainty. Reports showed steady revenue, stable market share, and familiar patterns that lulled leadership into believing nothing was changing. The early warning signs, tiny shifts in customer behavior, looked too insignificant to matter. By the time executives questioned the trend, the migration had already begun. Meanwhile, the small idea was evolving. What began as a simple tool gained new features shaped directly by user feedback. The founder listened to every complaint, every suggestion, every rough edge that made the product harder to use. Each iteration made the tool more intuitive, more relevant, and more aligned with how people actually lived and worked. The product didn't just grow, it adapted. The giant responded with the same strategy it had used for years: broad campaigns, feature-heavy releases, and elaborate roadmaps designed to impress investors rather than solve real problems. The disconnect widened. Customers no longer wanted complexity wrapped in prestige. They wanted something that worked, something light, something created by someone who understood them. What made the situation more dangerous for the giant was its own internal inertia. Departments resisted change. Legacy systems slowed development. Budgets favored familiar ideas over new ones. The company that once innovated fearlessly had become a monument to its own past. And monuments, no matter how grand, rarely move fast enough to face new realities. As word of mouth spread, the small idea found its way into niche communities that the giant had overlooked entirely. These communities amplified the product's strengths, creating pockets of enthusiasm that grew into networks of loyal users. Soon, those networks began influencing purchasing decisions in unexpected places. The small idea wasn't simply an alternative anymore. It was a symbol of what the future could look like. The momentum created a tension the giant could no longer ignore. Market analysts started asking uncomfortable questions. Customer surveys reflected a shift in expectations. And inside the giant's walls, a quiet unease began to grow. Something unfamiliar was happening, something that didn't fit their traditional models. A collision was forming, and the giant, for the first time in decades, was not prepared. The collision became unavoidable when the giant finally launched its long-awaited response. It was a sweeping update, expensive, ambitious, wrapped in marketing that promised a bold new era. Yet when customers tried it, the reaction was immediate and unsettling. It felt heavy, complicated, out of touch, a product designed by committees, not by people who understood the problem. Meanwhile, the small idea released a quiet improvement. No announcement, no spectacle. Just a simple update shaped by months of direct conversations with users. It fixed the exact frustrations the giant had overlooked. The contrast was stark. One company was performing for the world, the other was listening to it. As the gap widened, internal conflicts exploded inside the giant's headquarters. Teams disagreed over strategy. Some argued that the small idea was a temporary threat, an irritating blip rather than a structural shift. Others saw the danger clearly. Customers weren't choosing a cheaper option, they were choosing a better experience. The old assumptions, once so reliable, no longer applied. Meetings stretched late into the night. Analysts scrambled to explain the erosion of trust. Managers pushed for faster development cycles, only to be slowed by sprawling systems that resisted every change. The giant had become a machine built for scale, not for agility. What once made it powerful now made it vulnerable. Outside those walls, momentum kept building. Users shared stories about how the small idea had changed their workflow, saved them time, or simplified something they once found frustrating. Communities celebrated every improvement, feeling a sense of ownership that the giant could never replicate. The product had ceased to be a tool. It had become a movement. Then came the moment that shifted the balance entirely. A major client, one the giant believed would never leave, announced it was switching to the small idea. Not for cost savings, not for publicity, but because the new solution simply worked better. Overnight, headlines changed. Investors panicked. The giant's reputation, once untouchable, now felt fragile. The psychological impact was immediate. If one major client could leave, others could follow. Conversations inside the giant turned from confidence to fear. Leaders questioned whether they had waited too long, whether they had trusted their brand more than their users, whether the problem was no longer about features, but about philosophy. The founder of the small idea watched this shift with a mix of determination and disbelief. They had never set out to dismantle an empire. They had only tried to solve a problem. Yet the market was now asking a deeper question, one that would determine the future of the entire industry. What happens when the world decides it no longer needs the giant? The answer arrived not with an explosion, but with a quiet, undeniable shift. The industry giant issued a statement acknowledging the problem, promising a renewed focus on the customer. It sounded sincere, even hopeful. But by then, the momentum had already moved elsewhere. People weren't waiting for the giant to change. They were already living in a world shaped by the small idea. Inside the giant's walls, the atmosphere grew heavier. Each new report confirmed what leaders feared. The erosion wasn't slowing, It was accelerating. The giant wasn't being toppled by a competitor with superior resources or sweeping innovations. It was being undone by its own distance from the very people it claimed to serve. The realization was devastating. Scale had become its greatest weakness. Meanwhile, the small idea embraced its role in the unfolding transformation. The founder expanded the team carefully, choosing builders who shared the same obsession with simplicity and usefulness. They avoided the traps that often follow early success: excess, complexity, ego. Growth wasn't the goal, relevance was. And relevance, earned through trust, became their greatest power. The shift in the market accelerated again when smaller businesses, freelancers, and emerging creators began sharing how the product gave them an edge the giant never could. It wasn't just a tool now, it was a catalyst. It helped people move faster, work cleaner, and think differently. The product didn't scale through force, it scaled through impact, and impact spreads fast. The giant struggled to catch up. It unveiled a series of rushed updates, each attempting to mimic the simplicity that made the new solution so beloved. But simplicity can't be forced from the top down. It has to be built from the ground up, by people who understand what matters most. The giant's attempts felt artificial, like replicas of a story it didn't truly understand. The climax came when the industry's leading publication named the small idea the most influential innovation of the year. Not because it dominated the market, but because it changed the direction of the entire conversation. Suddenly, the question wasn't who had the biggest platform. It was who understood the user best. And by that measure, the once small idea was now setting the standard. In the end, the dismantling of the giant wasn't a tale of destruction. It was a reminder that progress often begins quietly, crafted by people who see what others overlook. The giant endured, but it was no longer the center of its universe. Its dominance had been rewritten by a founder who listened, iterated, and cared deeply about solving a real problem. And today, the lesson still stands. No company is too big to fail. No idea is too small to matter. And the next transformation may already be waiting in someone's notebook, coded late at night, shaped by a need no one else has taken seriously. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future.